So we're going to focus in here in the model on that relationship cycle, right? And talk a little bit about what we mean by the relationship cycle. But I always like to start this area by talking about rapport. Now, how many of you would raise your hand and say, when I do an interview, I work to develop some rapport with my subject? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you would be able to stand up and offer me a definition of what rapport is? Can somebody offer me a definition of what rapport is? Please.
It's where you start to develop a relationship in which the other person feels comfortable speaking to you and being around you.
So developing a relationship in which the other person feels comfortable speaking to you and being around you. I like that. Yes, sir.
Also, just to add to that is finding a common ground with that person, something you can talk about, building off of that.
So what do you mean by common ground? Can you give me an example?
Yeah, something like it could be easy as sports or family or kids or something simple as that.
Okay.
Just start talking about that. And
So a common interest. Hobby. Okay. How many of you use common ground? We're going to talk about common ground. How many of you have used this before? How many of you have heard this term before? Just a few of you. Okay. Very good. One more definition of rapport. What is rapport? I'm still waiting for somebody from the military to tell me about negative rapport. Maybe Steve could talk about negative rapport later. We've heard that term. What is rapport? Well, the Higg is actually, please, go ahead. Very good, a mutual understanding. So here we're talking more about a kind of cognitive element, right? That we both understand the circumstances that brought us together, and maybe it leads to shared goals, or am I putting too many words on your mouth? Okay, terrific. Thank you for that. The Higg has funded quite a number of studies looking at how you measure rapport and how you manipulate or develop rapport. And I want to talk through some of the conceptual elements of those and then talk about the principles and tactics that kind of fall out of that. So interrogators, in fact, frequently highlight the importance of rapport. We've supported a number of studies in which we've done kind of systematic interviews with hundreds of highly experienced interrogators, as well as surveys of interrogators not only in the US but around the world, asking them what they know about or think about rapport and whether they use rapport. And like many of you, the endorsement rates for use of rapport and kind of advocacy for rapport-based, 80-90% of samples will say, yes, rapport. But here's what's interesting. When you ask people what rapport is, you get lots of different definitions. And in fact, I challenge you, as you've gone through or go through future training, look at how they talk about rapport. What is rapport? How do they define it? How do they teach you to develop it? How much time do they actually spend training you on rapport? I suspect it's not as much time as they should be, right? We've also done a number of field studies in which we came up with objective measures of rapport, or we developed subjective measures. We asked participants who were in these studies, not real-world interrogations, but in some cases actual studies, whether they had developed rapport. And we have pretty complex measures for developing those kind of subjective assessments. It turns out, and I'll show you the data, rapport is critical to the development of cooperation. And we can develop a pretty good sense of what rapport actually is. So one of the best models of rapport is proposed by Tickle-Degnan and Rosenthal, Bob Rosenthal. And it involves three elements, and I like to think of them as it as an ABC model. ABC as an affective, emotional, behavioral, B, and cognitive, C. Okay? So the affective component is what we call positivity. It's that kind of positive emotional feeling that you get with an individual, right? You enjoy their company. You feel comfortable being around them, right? It's positivity, not negativity, that we're looking to achieve. That's the affective component. Emotional aspects of liking or respect. We'll talk more about those concepts. The behavioral component is what we call coordination. This has to do with reciprocal responding. As I ask a question or engage you, you have a response, which drives me to respond, which drives you to respond. It becomes a natural conversation in which there's a behavioral rhythm to it, right? Coordination, that's the behavioral component. And then finally, the cognitive component, what's called mutual attention. So mutual attention is a high degree of involvement that the interviewer and interviewee experience that ultimately leads to shared goals and a common understanding of the situation. Do you see the ABC components of that? Affective, behavioral, cognitive, right? Affective, positivity, positive emotions. Behavioral is that coordination, the reciprocal responding that occurs, the interaction, the nature of the interaction, the fluidity of the conversation. And the third one, the cognitive mutual attention, leading to shared goals and a common understanding. So we can actually develop measures based on this theoretical model and have developed measures of rapport based on these theoretical models. This theoretical model also offers us a window into the tactics that are useful for developing rapport. Now, somebody mentioned trust earlier, right? Trust. Is trust important in an interrogation, interview context, elicitation context? Why is trust important? Why do I need to trust the person that I'm talking to? Why might trust facilitate cooperation and ultimately facilitate disclosure? Do you think about trust in the context of your interviews? There are different ways to think about trust, but there's quite a robust literature on trust. Not only its perception, but its development. Trust is a psychological state comprising the intention to accept vulnerability based on positive expectations of the actions of the trustee. Can you accept that the subject that you're interviewing will feel vulnerable and is in a state of vulnerability? Trust is when they accept that vulnerability with the expectation that there's a positive outcome at the end, right? And here, I don't want to lead you to be thinking about manipulation of consequences. In fact, we can have a very long discussion around manipulating or theming around consequences or anticipated consequences. The short version here is that the research suggests there's lots of problems with theming around consequences in terms of the validity, veracity of information that you get. Okay? We think of trust as involving 4 key components. We're going to talk more about reciprocity, but what is reciprocity? Let me give you an example. This morning we're at breakfast, the 4 of us, having a lovely conversation, and Professor Dando says, I need to go up to my room for a moment. I'll be back. So we don't think anything of it. A few minutes later, she comes back with a package of things. And to each of us, she's brought a gift from the UK. In fact, she was so thoughtful that not only did she bring a gift for each of us, but she brought a gift for my daughter, a chocolate egg for Easter. Huge chocolate egg. What is reciprocity? Now, I already liked Professor Dando. Not only do I like her professionally, but I like her interpersonally. But what did those gifts do? What effect did they have on us? Reciprocity is the psychological burden of gift giving, right? It's the psychological burden of gift giving. And we're going to talk more in depth about the nature of reciprocity, but we believe reciprocity is at the heart of trust. And we've got data to back it up now. There are three other components that are important, though. In your context, in the interview interrogation context, there's also a risk element that turns out to be really important. When people do things for us that come at personal risk to them, how do we evaluate them? How does it change the nature of that reciprocal giving? Third, independence. Trust is independent of what is going to be given at the back end, right? When we trust somebody, it's independent of the potential gains, right? It's the real positivity of the interaction that becomes important. And then finally, predictability and genuineness appear to be critical for the development of trust. Being able to understand and predict somebody's behavior in a given context turns out to be really important for determining whether you can trust their actions, right? Did they do this just to get me to do something? Or is this a consistent pattern of behavior on their part that's predictable and more generalizable? It's that latter, generalizability and predictableness, that turns out to be critical. In the literature, there turn out to be two forms of trust. An affective form of trust and a cognitive form of trust. Let me describe each of them. So, affective trust has to do with seeing somebody as cognitive trust, I apologize. Cognitive trust has to do with seeing somebody as competent, fair, respectful, and sincere. You can think of professionalism being another term or way to think about cognitive trust. Affective trust, on the other hand, has to do with liking the person, having a positive evaluation of them, having somebody take interest in you as an individual, and that individual showing empathy or displaying empathy. Now, which of these do you think predicts cooperation and disclosure in the interrogation context? When there's an element of resistance, when there's a potential consequence associated with the disclosure. Which of these do you think is more powerful? How many say affective? How many say cognitive? It's going to surprise you. It turns out to be cognitive. Cognitive trust turns out to be one of the better predictors of cooperation and ultimately disclosure in the interrogation context. Right? We'll talk more about how to develop this. Finally, persuasion. How many of you have heard the term persuasion before? How many of you have been persuaded today on your drive in? I guarantee it. You listened to the radio, you looked at signs. Here's the thing, Steve and I like to say, there are 3 decades of research on persuasion, social influence. Much of that has been consumed by the business and marketing industry. And they have systematically taken money out of your pocket using those principles very effectively. However, in your line of work and in the interrogation schools that you've attended, I suspect you've never seen the 6 principles of persuasion talked about. I suspect that you've heard very little about the role of persuasion, psychological social influence, in leading to behavior change. Suasion is the act of influencing or persuading one another. So we always like to ask this question. There are various effects of persuasion. So you can have somebody who's on the left here, ultimately very obedient. You ask a question, they give you the response. They tell you exactly what you want to hear. On the right is defiance or resistance, a failure to conform, a failure to respond. Where do you want to be on this continuum as an interviewer, as an elicitor? Do you want to be over to the left? Do you want to be to the right? Do you want to be somewhere in the middle? How many of you would say to the left? Nobody? How many would say to the right? This is an educated group, Steve. How many of you would say right in the middle? This is where we assert that you want to be. You want to be talking to somebody who is cooperating with you and responding to you, but will tell you when you are wrong. Will tell you when the information that you have is wrong. Will call you out on your facts. And will assert their independence at times. There are ways to get to this point. And leveraging social influence is key. Ultimately, we want you to achieve cooperation. And I like to borrow Steve's concept here of operational accord. I think it fits perfectly to your context. Cooperation via operational accord. An interrogator-interviewer relationship marked by a constructive degree of respect and mutual affinity. Let me say that again. Respect and mutual affinity. There's an element there of cognitive trust, professionalism and respect for one another, and an element of liking and rapport and affinity. Based upon an understanding of, and perhaps even a guarded appreciation for, respective concerns, intentions, and desired outcomes. Ultimately, this is the Zen state, if you will, that you want to achieve in the interrogation context. All right, with that conceptual overview, I want to talk with you about 3 tactics, principles and tactics. And this is where we're going to kind of go back and forth. So we're going to bring Steve and Eric up. I'm going to describe the principle and the tactic. They're going to talk to you about it, amplify it with their personal experience, and they're even going to do a demonstration of how they might leverage this particular tactic. Okay? And along the way, I'm going to show you some of the data that supports this and tell you a little bit about some of the studies. Okay? So common ground, affirmation, and reciprocity. Common ground, affirmation, and reciprocity. Each of these tactics have an effect on a given, what we call resistance posture. There are many reasons that people resist providing information to you. And I think strategically understanding the nature of why people resist is key to you strategically deploying the techniques that will overcome that resistance posture. Okay? So I'm going to talk to you about 3 forms of resistance that can be met by using these tactics or principles. The first one is common ground. And the resistance posture associated with common ground is one of us versus them. It's a very common resistance posture in which the subject sees you as an outgroup, sees you as someone who isn't looking out for their best interests, someone who is an adversary to them. In fact, in some of your line of work, you may talk to individuals who come from different countries, who speak different languages, who have different cultural customs. In fact, you may look very different from them. The resistance posture here is, again, us versus them. And the challenge here, the principle is to begin to identify with that individual in a way that they see you not as an outgroup, but as an in-group. And let me tell you, there are decades of research on in-group, out-group effects in the psychological literature. We understand social perception, in-group, out-group, really well. And we can take that understanding and actually transform it into a principle and a strategy. So the principle here is that people develop affinity for and follow the recommendations of people that are similar to them. At some level, it's rather implicit. The more that we are similar to someone, the more we have a positive affective response to them that eases the nature of the relationship and the conversation. We no longer see them as an outgroup, we see them as somebody who's relevant to us. By the way, there's lots of research even on Palestinians and Israelis who see themselves as coming from very different worlds with very different belief systems, very different values. But studies have shown that to the extent that you can develop common ground in those two groups, one-on-one, you can break the in-group, out-group barriers. You can produce cooperation rather than resistance and defiance, right? So here's the tactic. The tactic is to elicit, and I want to kind of highlight elicit, and highlight overlapping interests, shared identities, or even incidental commonalities, right? And I want to just kind of display this figure here. Each of us has a persona of ourselves that has multiple layers, if you will, right? There is this kind of superficial layer of what I'm wearing today, and how I dress, and how I look or appear to you causes you to react to me in certain ways, right? You draw a lot of inferences on how I look. These are superficial characteristics. The way I comb my hair, the extent to which I'm gray or growing gray. These are superficial characteristics. We also have a layer of personal characteristics. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm a son. I have certain interests. Sports interests. I graduated from Florida State. I went to college. But I love college football. I love college basketball. These are personal characteristics that you can't get from just looking at me. You've got to dig deeper and try to understand me. But there are opportunities for common ground. And then finally, there's an intimate core that I have that, by the way, you're not going to get to without working a little harder, right? These are maybe my political views, my values, my religious views, experiences that I've had that shape who I am as an individual. By the way, what do we think of people who we first meet them and they start to tell us about those intimate details? What's your reaction to those people? Too much too soon, right? Too much too soon. The notion here, the theory is that you have to graduate through these layers in getting to know people. You've got to start at the superficial layer and work your way in to those intimate details, which in fact you may be very interested in eliciting from them. But you can't go straight for those intimate details without starting at the outer layers, right? So how do we develop commonalities at each of these? Well, maybe you wore a yellow tie today. That's a superficial commonality, but guess what? It turns out to be really important. People that dress the same have a natural affinity for one another, right? Could be, your background or where the context where you find yourself, right? Those kind of superficial, visually relevant details. Personal details, of course, are those father, son, husband, likes sports, went to college, roots for certain teams, has certain hobbies or interests, has a job in a profession, I'm a professor, right? All of those things are personal details that you may have access to given information or intelligence. You may not. You may have to dig for them. But they allow you opportunities for identifying commonalities and developing common ground. Getting to the core is the real challenge. So we're going to talk more about this. I want to show you just a couple pieces of data. These are two studies. The first study, the Meissner-Rossano 2016, is actually a field study that we did with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. We trained 120 investigators over a year's time. And we followed them out into the field and we looked at how they used these tactics. And we showed that when these interrogators developed or used common ground in the way that we trained it, not only did it facilitate rapport, but it directly predicted cooperation. and ultimately facilitated disclosure. The second study, though, the green boxes here represent a laboratory study in which we can control these things and systematically present. But we put our students in these kind of precarious situations. I don't have time to go into the details of the paradigms, but let me just give you one example. We pull students in and we actually have them complete a survey on illegal behaviors that they've done. These are actual illegal behaviors, from things like driving while drunk to selling medications, to stealing, it's like check fraud, gosh, I'm trying to think of some of the others. That gives you, I think, a good sampling of it. And then we ask them about, we interview them about the intimate details of the most egregious illegal behavior that they've ever engaged in a context in which it's kind of video recorded, public. It's a challenging context for the students, right? By the way, we tried to do this in a training with LAPD and with Tempe PD recently, and Rhode Island PD, the Rhode Island state group. And the law enforcement folks were uncomfortable interviewing folks about these illegal behaviors. For good reason, right? But my point is, these kids are nervous when you talk to them about these, and they're not that forthcoming originally. You have to work to develop cooperation and rapport in order to elicit some of the intimate details of these things. But when you do, when you establish common ground, it facilitates perceptions of rapport, ultimately leading to cooperation and finally disclosure. Okay, I want to pause here. I want to bring up Steve and Eric, and we'll do a demo and kind of amplify this.
So for purposes of the, sorry, can everyone hear me? Purposes of the demonstration of these different tactics, we're going to introduce you to a scenario. All right. So what we have here is a male, white, 39 years old, just brought in. Name of Jeff Burton. Balding in the back. Dashingly good looking. You get the idea. So he's brought in on charges of rape, okay, from a house party the night before last. Interestingly, he's also suspected of, does everyone here work locally? If I say Barrio Azteca, do we know what I'm talking about? Okay. He's suspected of providing a safe house to Barrio Azteca, right? So after they go conduct operations, they need a place to cool their jets for a little bit. They use his place. All right, he's a physical therapist, but he lives over by the, way out west, by the country club, El Paso Country Club. So, all right, just, that's a clue there. So he's brought in, he's quite nervous. He doesn't know yet if charges are being officially filed against him yet.
Yeah, Steve Klein. Please have a seat.
Okay, nice to meet you.
You know that? Forgive me, I couldn't help but notice. I like that white shirt.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
It looks better with that. Does that have a button down? I like that color. It looks better.
It's Calvin Klein. I find that it it fits me.
Oh, yeah. Well, so it does look really nice. Appreciate that. So, Jeff, you understand why you're here today, right?
I mean, I have an idea. I mean, it was a house party across the street, and things got a little crazy. But yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that you can tell me more about that.
Sure, I can. Yeah, I mean, I can't help but recall though. I mean, I wasn't always this age. I've had experiences with crazy house parties and stuff. Just sometimes you get out of control.
It was crazy. It was crazy last night. I haven't.
Crazy?
Yeah.
Tell me more.
I haven't been drinking like that, and geez, I mean, 12, 15 years. I let my guard down, you know?
Yeah. You let your guard down. That's a difficult one for, I mean, again, I can think of my own experiences where you have the best of intentions and things go awry. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, these are buddies of mine across the street. They had some friends over. There was, a different girl there last night. I mean,
Different girl?
Yeah, it's a cousin of one of the, their roommates across the street. I don't know if you've ever gone over there, but yeah, I mean, she's the cousin of one of them. She just spent the past like 2 months or 2 or 3 months over in London. She was living with a boyfriend over there. But I guess that, they broke up, she moved back, and then so was visiting, her cousin here in El Paso.
All right, thank you.
So let's pause it here. Give me one example of common ground that Steve utilized.
White shirt.
Good. Now where is that at the level? Where is that in our? Yeah, so it's clearly evident, right? Clearly evident that he could see that. He had that going for him, right? He happened to have a white shirt on too. Now, we can ask him, did you guys plan that?
No.
Okay. So here's what I would say to you. Think carefully about if you're setting this investigation up and it's not a spur of the moment, you're picking this individual up. Think carefully about how you present yourself for that interview. What are some things that you can do to amplify some degree of similarity between you and the subject? If you have the ability to do it, think strategically before you enter the room and think of ways that you can identify commonality that's superficial. This was coincidence, but it could have been very strategic as well. Give me another example. What other example did you use?
Steve said it's a party.
So Steve said he liked to party, and he still likes to party. But when he was younger. Now he does that shit at wine bars. Let me tell you, it doesn't work. Good, very good.
I said not to get the ice, I don't know why.
Where would that be on our scale? Is it an intimate, a personal, or a superficial?
It's probably somewhere between personal and intimate.
Yeah, it depends on how far it goes, right? It's a personal detail. So a personal detail is something that you wouldn't mind generally sharing with somebody that you're just meeting, right? Is that something, I mean, just going to the level of, oh yeah, I used to party. Maybe in the right context. Maybe not for a job interview. But in the right context, you probably don't mind doing that. One more example of something that he leveraged for common ground. Somebody pick it up?
Crazy parties.
Crazy parties. Okay. I wasn't thinking of that one, but I think that related to I used to like to party and have crazy parties, probably an extension of that. Did you pick this one up?
The girl?
I don't think it was the female.
I used to be one. I
Okay.
wouldn't know that, so.
Liberal transgender laws.
What did we mention? Something about doing the right stuff and stuff getting out of hand or something like that?
Very good. Very good. Everybody hear that? Doing the right stuff, getting out of hand. We've all had times in our lives, right? He could have pushed that a little bit more and actually told a narrative or a story, a personal experience, right? And those, by the way, lots of research on narratives and persuasion, very powerful. Okay? Where would that fall in here? It's getting into the intimate, right? You wouldn't just share that right off the cuff. You want to have some degree of comfort in the relationship. Do you see how this gets operationalized? Okay. So I want you to stay up here. I'm going to go to the next principle, and we'll just kind of roll through this. Do you want to add? Please.
Having been Air Force Special Operations Command, then my last assignment at Central Command, and having testified for 5 committees in Congress about interrogation doctrine, I can't tell you how many times I've heard detainees referred to as those people. Those people who are very different from us. Now think about just what Dr. Meissner has presented today about a principle and a tactic to obtain more information. Is it about making Jeff one of those people or finding commonality? It's just the opposite. So a lot of times what seems to be intuitive or even counterintuitive, we will find very, very helpful. And research bears it out over and over and over again. It's called empathy. Now, that empathy doesn't mean agreement. I mean, because you deal with some people often who've done some pretty awful, horrific things. It's not agreement, but behind that, there's a person that you need to connect with, because that person is one that holds information.
Yeah, we might describe this as a humanizing approach. Right? You have to be able to put yourself in the seat of the other individual, in the shoes of the other individual. You have to be able to understand their context in order to leverage these strategies. Affirmation, the second one, affirmation. So another reason that people resist, or a resistance posture, is based on their identity. It's based on what the disclosure means for how they're going to be viewed by society, by their friends, and by you in the room. It's all about their identity. And when people grapple with these identity conflicts, there's a very successful strategy for dealing with that, kind of assuaging that identity, and it's called affirmation. So here's the principle of affirmation. People strive to maintain self-integrity, to think of themselves as moral, competent, and good. That's what we all want to be seen as moral, competent, and good. To the extent that they are successful in being seen that way, they feel protected and less vulnerable in threatening situations. So you can actually affirm that self-identity in strategic ways that mitigate the resistance posture associated with identity. And this is the tactic. Your job is to elicit and affirm a subject's values, beliefs, experiences as they relate to the self-concept. And here's an image of how we think of the self-concept. We think of our self-concept in terms of our role, right? So as a professor, that's my social role, right? It's how I interact with society. How do you think I think of myself as a professor? Smart, having integrity, valuing the truth. Does that make sense? Values. We all have values, right? We all have a moral code of right and wrong. And you can strategically elicit that and affirm those values. We all have beliefs about how society works and your role in society. We all have certain abilities, competencies. Uh-oh. Technical support. We'll see if we can get that back, but we can keep talking through it. We all have competencies or abilities, right? Competencies or abilities. And we like to be seen as competent and successful. I'm a father as a social role, but it also means that I like to be a good father. I like to be seen as a good father in the way that I deal with my child. Okay? I think it might be resetting itself. We'll just roll with this. So let's let Steve and Eric go through affirmation. Affirmation is all about eliciting those self-concepts, those positive self-concepts, and then affirming it. You strike me as a very honest person. I can see how the truth is important to you as a professor.
So Jeff, you're telling me about this party. Tell me a little bit more about that.
I mean, it's just supposed to be a little, get together. I mean, we get together from time to time. I mean, they're not like best buds of mine, but, if I'm going to grill out or something, I invite them over. That's all it was supposed to be, right? I mean, we're very adult about it, right? But I went over to their place, they're both lushes. And, that's not my style, but, I let my guard down.
Lushes, tell me more about that.
Well, I mean, they could, if they got a license, they could open a bar right there, out of their home.
Yeah. That looks like that's a concern for you, especially being a neighbor.
Well, I mean, of course it is, because, you walk across the street, you come to my house. I don't know if you've already been to my house. I've picked up, uniformed officers. But, I mean, it's spick and span in there. I mean, I run a business out of there.
Yeah.
I have to exude, some professionalism.
Right. No, I imagine your neighbors really appreciate you a lot more than they do these other neighbors. Is that what you're trying to say?
I mean, I'd have to imagine, so yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, because it's not just inside where I'm running, you know, my business, it's outside.
Yeah.
Right? I have people come by and maintain my yard. You know, I live next to the country club. I mean, this is posh.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I mean, you've probably heard the saying that no man is an island, but a lot of people think they are. But you seem to be one who realizes that you're part of a greater whole, of your community.
I'm part of a
Is that
community.
right?
Yeah, exactly right. Part of a community. But I don't think that they're pilots.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's all about getting the girls, right? Just being playboys, living that life.
Okay, so let's pause here. How did he affirm? Now I just want to make one point. In the next session, we're going to talk about elicitation skills. These are the foundation to successfully using these social influence tactics. And you're going to see in the next session how Steve is modeling these elicitation skills that we're going to teach you. In order to affirm somebody's self-concept, you have to understand how they see themselves. Thank you. How they see themselves. I usually teach to 400 students an intro, sometimes without a mic. Oh. So what happens if you get it wrong? What happens if you mislabel somebody? Have you ever been mislabeled? Somebody says, well, you strike me as this. You don't know me, right? In fact, instead of drawing you closer, you've just pushed them further away. You gotta get it right. And the only way to get it right is to let them tell you about themselves, to elicit it from them, and then to affirm. Does that make sense? Okay, so show me the examples, or tell me the examples of how he affirmed Eric. Or at least two of them. What did he get from Eric that he reflected back?
Part of the community.
Part of the community, that's right. So, Steve, what were you trying to reflect back there in terms of being part of the community? What did you hear from Eric?
Oh, they're talking about, for instance, how he kept his house immaculate. You know, we could extend that out to the lawn and so forth. And also certain standards of behavior. He seemed very dismissive of the heavy drinking going on across the street, although he tried to be sociable. So,
Yeah, very good. Does that make sense? Do you see how he drew that out of him? And then he kind of affirmed it back? How do you feel when somebody affirms how you see yourself? What does it make you do to that person? It makes you like them. Man, you get me, right? You get me. And it's not a love fest, okay? We're not trying to create a love fest here. But you're showing respect to them, not only in listening to them, but reflecting back how they see themselves and valuing it positively. Does that make sense?
I was going to say it makes them or you as the subject feel understood.
That's right. That's right. And we all, fundamentally, we all want to be understood, right? Again, it goes back to those core elicitation skills, which you were taught in negotiation class, in negotiation school. We're going to amplify that. Does this make sense? One more tactic I want to get to. This is my hand wave to it works, by the way. Debbie Davis did a study in which she asked, this was done in Israel. She asked Israelis and Palestinians about how they viewed one another and also their negative behaviors towards the other group. Things that people just don't want to admit, right? And she found that when you affirm the self-concept in this way, you get people to disclose significantly more of those negative behaviors and values and beliefs. And it has to do with that relationship that you're creating. We've done it in the lab here. This was a cheating study in which we actually induced people to cheat on a test that has high stakes, and then we interrogate the hell out of them. Not really. We have an IRB, human subjects. But we systematically interrogate them. And we try to get them to disclose all kinds of information about that cheating incident. It's very complicated. When you affirm and elicit the self-concept, you facilitate rapport, cooperation, and disclosure, essentially liking. They like you more, they become more cooperative, they disclose more information. All right, last one.
Okay, well, thank you for that, but I got you wrote Leonard a few silly neighbor gifts, so I'll just put them under my tree.
Wait! You bought me a present?
Uh-huh.
Well, why would you do such a thing?
I don't know, because it's Christmas?
Oh, Penny! I know you think you're being generous, but the foundation of gift giving is reciprocity. You haven't given me a gift. You've given me an obligation.
Don't feel bad, Penny. It's a classic rookie mistake. My first Hanukkah with Sheldon, he yelled at me for 8 nights.
It's okay, you don't have to give me anything in return.
Of course I do. The essence of the custom is that I now have to go out and purchase for you a gift of commensurate value and representing the same perceived level of friendship as that represented by the gift you've given me. Well, it's no wonder suicide rates skyrocket this time of year.
Reciprocity, right? Okay, so here's the thing about reciprocity. Here's the resistance posture. The resistance posture is, I don't trust you. Do you get that in your line of work? I don't trust you. That's the resistance posture. How do we develop trust? Reciprocity is at the core of trust building. Okay? Reciprocity, here's the principle. Just as Sheldon described it, giving something of perceived value elicits an innate response to give something back. Increased risk associated with the gift amplifies that. Okay? So I went to England recently. I was in Liverpool doing some Tier 4, Tier 5 training, which those in the UK understand, interrogation training, and was visiting a friend of mine in Liverpool who knows that I enjoy soccer, took me to what's called a derby match. It's a match between the two home teams, very contentious. And this was at Liverpool, so it was Liverpool's home stadium. And she got us tickets on the second row. Okay. This was a gift. I have no idea how the hell I'm going to pay it back. But I love her. Right? My affinity for her went out the window. Right? And this comes at some financial risk to her. These were not cheap tickets. And she had to call in a favor to get these tickets. She got it literally 2 days before the match. When you engage risk, you amplify it. So in the studies that we do in the lab, the subjects are brought into the lab and their cell phones are taken away. How many of you have your cell phones close to your body right now? Even in your hand? Right. Cell phones, by the way, are extensions of our body now, right? They're part of our person. They have all of our personal information on it. When your cell phone is taken away from you, how do you feel? Right? We take it away from them for the experiment, and then we induce cheating. Ultimately, they get in trouble. They have to meet with one of the experimenters, who was the kind of lead experimenter. One of the prior experimenters asked the subject about their cell phone. The person says, "Oh yeah, I gave it back. Can I get it back?" The subject generally asks. And the experimenter goes, no, we're not allowed to give it back until you leave. Okay, that's the rule. The experimenter, though, the chief experimenter walks in and goes through some initial dialogue, elicits the desire to have the cell phone back, right? And offers reciprocity, but does so at risk because we set up this interaction between the experimenters that essentially the chief experimenter is being told by another experimenter, you can't do that, you're not allowed to do that. Remember, it violates the rule. You're going to get in trouble. But the experimenter comes back with the cell phone, gives it back to the subject, says, I really shouldn't have done this, but I know what it's like to be without my cell phone. I know if I was in your situation, you'd do the same thing for me. Leave it. How does that affect perceived trust? And how does it affect cooperation and disclosure? It has a significant effect on it. So here's the tactic. Elicit a need from somebody and offer something of value to fulfill that need. If you can amplify risk in some way, you amplify the power of the effect. Does that make sense? Don't give people necessarily things that they don't need. But let me tell you that sometimes even things that they don't need can work. So David Matsumoto did a study, cross-cultural study, by the way, across language and across cultures, in which he simply did this, gave people a bottle of water. That simple act of giving led to more cooperation and disclosure. Now, we don't place great value on a bottle of water unless you just traverse the desert, right? Even simple things do. But you can amplify this effect to the extent that you understand the desire. There are multiple examples, and maybe I'll just let Steve offer one, of how interrogators can leverage reciprocity strategically. I think too often, let me just say this, too often you miss opportunities for reciprocity because all you hear from the subject is a resistance posture and a problem that they have, right? What I want you to start seeing are problems as opportunities, as of needs that the subject has, as an opportunity for you to fulfill it.
A question. How does this relate to, or is it possibly the same thing with quid pro quo? Or is that something different?
Steve, do you want to talk about
Quid pro quo, generally speaking?
Microphone.
Generally speaking, or?
With relation to reciprocity, is it a little bit different, or
Well,
maybe the same?
I'm glad you asked that question. This is what I'm talking about when science doesn't label. Quid pro quo is often used, I give you something, I expect something back. But it's seen more as just like a business transaction with no underlying need on either part. It's just literally a cognitive, you gave me something, okay, now that's a deal, almost a deal made ahead of time. The difference here is this is not a deal made explicitly, ever, by the interrogator. In fact, if it's explicit, the power is diminished to the point of little or no influence. The other part is that, why it's important to understand the science is because, I mean, this goes way back to our earliest forms of civilization. In fact, anthropologists would say that reciprocity, what we're talking about here, is what separates us from every other species that's ever appeared on the earth. It made it possible for you to have a university here, or the city of El Paso, or the state of Texas writ large. Because if the three of us, you know, and Leonora, and Coral, so we're gonna have some females in the group for reasons I don't understand why, but we'll be able to explain it. But let's say that Leonora is really good at building fires. She gets just the right wood, builds a fire, but she won't let us near it. And I go out, you know, maybe Eric and I go out and we find meat. We bring it back, but we won't share it. Or she lets us sit next to the fire, but we won't give her all those things. It's that reciprocity that she gives us heat, we provide meat. Eric keeps us safe, and Coral finds other nuts and seeds that we need, whatever it is. But we exchange freely. That has been taught. It's not an instinct. It is a learned behavior that we teach, and not just we. I mean, we writ large across all cultures because it's been studied. We teach every generation to give back. Who here has ever received a Christmas card from somebody unexpectedly, somebody they knew years ago? Have you ever had that experience? What did you do? I sent a Christmas card back. That's always the answer. I guarantee you I do the same thing. Why? Why do we do this? It makes no sense at all. Did you want to start a relationship with them again? Probably not. Maybe, but probably not. It's there. So it's this underlying. The key to the science is understanding that it happens, it works consistently, but also understanding the why and how to both employ it and not employ it.
So rather than doing a demo, would you just tell this to Fawn phone call?
Oh, okay.
If you know it well enough.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking, is that the best one for?
Or if you have another one, yeah. Let's give a narrative example.
Well, okay, there's two great forms of reciprocity. One is the material for the immaterial, meaning you offer something like a bottle of water for information. And a friend of mine, Ali Safan, was a former FBI agent. They've read his book, Black Banners, he knew quite a bit about Al-Qaeda. And he was conducting an interrogation with somebody who was not very forthcoming whatsoever. And the person had expressed a need to call his family, let them know you're safe, which was against the rules, at least Ali certainly presented it that way. Again, increasing the risk associated with the gift on Ali's part, which enhanced the the influential nature of this simple act of offering a phone call. And by doing that, and then the trust that they would talk to their family and only exchange social information. I'm safe, is everybody okay on your side? As opposed to perhaps sharing some intelligence about where they're being held, or anything else like that. It turned out to be a turning point in that relationship from way over on the right side of that spectrum that Dr. Meissner described to a nice sweet spot where there was information flow. Now, is it as simple as that? Often it is. Often it is. Are we talking about self-disclosures as custody?
So we are, but talk about it. Yeah. No, go ahead.
Okay, well, again, it's not just a material good for an immaterial. It's not for tangible versus intangible. It is also, and this comes from the therapeutic world. You know, therapists need to get their clients to disclose, to be open. Some of them don't want to be for various reasons. They have discovered, and science has supported in terms of does it happen reliably. If I disclose something to you, or better still, if I want you to disclose something, I'll disclose something about myself. Two things are at play. Number one, I am setting a whole new rule of our relationship. There's a new level of intimacy that I'm introducing. It has to be done naturally, gracefully. But the other part is there's reciprocity. I'm kind of feeling vulnerable, and you have an interest in filling it by sharing your own. It happens over and over again. Does it work in the real world of interrogation? Absolutely. In Iraq 2003, not long after the invasion, I'm interrogating a gun runner who was very resistant to all sorts of very forceful measures, very forceful measures. In fact, most of my success as an interrogator came really cleaning up other people's messes, but they set the stage for me to be a lot more an attractive person to talk to. I was showing respect. But in this case, I disclosed we were both fathers. We both had daughters about the same age.
Steve doesn't have kids.
Yeah. So what I shared, you mean I flipped to them? It's just poor memory in my life. What I did was I shared with him that, you know, my concern, because he said he had no concern about who he sells against to. He's just a businessman trying to make the best of an uncertain world. I said, well, you know, I got to tell you something. As father, I think you appreciate it. I'm kind of embarrassed, but maybe you already know this about America. We have an awful drug problem. We have an awful drug problem. It's a scourge. In fact, I'm worried when I'm talking to you, part of my heart, my brain, and certainly most of my heart is thinking about my daughters going to school and some scumbag giving them drugs for free, getting them hooked, and ruining their lives. And here's the worst part, is this guy thinks that it's not his fault. He's just giving them away. He's not responsible. So that disclosure opened up the door to talk about actually what happens when he sells guns to insurgents and terrorists and other people with very, very nefarious intention. And he opened up. He opened up based on that. It was that self-disclosure led to self-disclosure. It's surprisingly powerful. Now, does it have to be true on your part? It's better if it is, because authentic is authentic. But
So be careful, right?
So be careful.
What's the worst thing that you can get caught doing? Yeah. You will ruin your credibility. And so we always say, if you're going to leverage some false narrative, be very careful in how you do it, because your credibility is on the line, and the trust or rapport that you've established is on the line. So this is just really.
Do you want to mention real quickly about the difference between building trust and repairing trust?
So, well, we need to take a break. We're giving you a nibble of the apple. I hope you see that. These are 3 tactics and 3 principles that fall out of research that involves much more than this. Okay. There are many other principles of persuasions and ways to leverage influence, to build cooperation, and to, as Steve says, repair trust. There are times when you lose credibility. It turns out, by the way, the research suggests that the simplest thing that you can do, anybody want to guess? And the most effective thing that you can do? Apologize. Own up to the mistake and try to move forward. Turns out, whether it's a negotiation context or an interview interrogation context, the most important thing you can do is to try to maintain your credibility by being forthcoming, transparent, honest, apologize, clarify, and move forward. Right? Does that make sense? There's a whole lot here. I'm sorry that we have these kind of small chunks. Does this seem useful to you? Is some of it new? some of it aligns, I think, with what your experience is.
Well, I think a lot of law enforcement officers do it. Biggest thing is we bring someone in, if they've been in a high stress situation or they've been on the run for murder or rape, they haven't eaten. So when you get them there, most officers do that, they'll buy someone something to eat. I know that was a big criticism when Dylan Roof got arrested. They went about a McDonald's and people were like, how dare you just murder 5 people? But that was enough to get them to basically confess to everything they did.
So it achieved reciprocity, right? It also showed compassion,
Passion.
showed respect and humanizing the individual, right? I don't care what you've done, we all have to eat. Right? We're all human in that level. And McDonald's, let's face it, goes a long way.